It was supposed to be a simple carjacking. 3 men, 1 gun, helpless female driver. In and out in 2 minutes. But Casey Morgan wasn't helpless, and what the attackers thought would be easy money became a 5-minute demonstration of why you never corner a Marine Force recon operative. Welcome to Untold Legends, where ordinary people hide extraordinary secrets that can change everything in an instant. Casey Morgan sat behind the wheel of her silver Toyota Camry, watching the neon lights of downtown Phoenix reflect off her windshield. The Uber app on her phone showed steady demand, typical for a Friday night in October. She'd been driving the night shift for 8 months now, and the routine had become a meditation of sorts. Pick up drunk college students, drop off late shift workers, navigate through the city's arteries while passengers lived their lives in her back seat, treating her like a piece of furniture with wheels. It was exactly what Casey needed. Invisible, unremarkable, safe. At 34, Casey had perfected the art of blending in. Gone was the confident posture that had carried her through 8 years in the Marine Corps. In its place was the slightly hunched shoulders of someone who'd learned that drawing attention was dangerous. Her auburn hair, once pulled back in regulation military style, now hung loose around her face, a curtain between her and the world. The PTSD had made normal employment impossible. Cubicles felt like coffins. Offices triggered panic attacks. Supervisors giving orders sent her into fight-or-flight responses that terrified everyone around her. But driving at night, controlling her environment, having escape routes mapped out at all times, that she could handle. Her phone buzzed. New ride request. Westside pickup, downtown destination. The passenger name read Brandon K. Probably another finance bro heading home from the bars. Casey accepted the ride and pulled away from the gas station where she'd been waiting. The pickup location was a trendy nightclub district, the kind of place where trust fund kids played at being adults while burning through daddy's money. As she drove, Casey's trained eyes automatically cataloged potential threats, exit routes, defensive positions, suspicious vehicles. Old habits from Fallujah and Helmand Province didn't disappear just because you traded desert camouflage for civilian clothes. The pickup spot was outside Eclipse, a club with a line of 20-somethings stretching around the block. Casey pulled up to the designated area and checked her phone. Brandon K. would be out in 2 minutes. She didn't notice the 3 men watching her from across the street. "That's the one," whispered Jake Morrison to his 2 companions. At 26, Jake had been running carjacking operations in Phoenix for 3 years. He'd developed a system: target rideshare drivers during shift changes when they were tired and carrying cash from the night's fares. "Looks perfect," agreed Tommy Rodriguez, Jake's lieutenant. Tommy was younger, hungrier, and stupid enough to follow Jake into anything. Small woman, alone, probably got at least $300 in cash from tonight. The 3rd member of their crew, Vincent Hayes, was having second thoughts. "Maybe we should wait for someone else. This feels too easy." Jake laughed quietly. "Vince, that's the point. We want easy. Look at her. She's maybe 5'6", probably weighs 120 pounds soaking wet. 3 of us, 1 of her. Math's pretty simple." They'd been watching Casey for 20 minutes, long enough to confirm she was alone and hadn't noticed their surveillance. Jake's crew had perfected their technique. Approach from 3 sides, gun visible but not threatening, demand keys and cash, disappear into the night. Most drivers were so scared, they handed everything over without resistance. "Brandon's not coming," Jake announced, pocketing the burner phone he'd used to request the ride. "Let's move while she's still waiting." Casey sat in her Camry, engine running, checking her watch. Brandon K. was now 5 minutes late. She was about to cancel the ride when she noticed movement in her peripheral vision. 3 figures approaching from different directions. Her military training kicked in automatically. Threat assessment, escape route analysis, weapons check. But Casey forced herself to remain calm. This was probably nothing. Just people walking to their cars. Then she saw the gun. For 8 months, Casey had successfully suppressed the part of her that had earned 2 Purple Hearts and a Bronze Star with valor. She'd buried Staff Sergeant Morgan so deep that most days she could almost believe the woman who'd led Marines through the streets of Ramadi had never existed. But as Jake Morrison approached her driver's side window with a pistol barely concealed under his jacket, something primal awakened in Casey's nervous system. Her heart rate didn't spike, it regulated. Her breathing didn't quicken, it deepened. Her hands didn't shake, they steadied. Staff Sergeant Morgan was coming back online. "Ma'am, I need you to step out of the vehicle," Jake said, tapping the gun against her window. Casey looked up at him with eyes that had seen Taliban fighters, IED explosions, and firefights that lasted 18 hours. Jake Morrison, street criminal from Phoenix, Arizona, suddenly didn't seem very threatening. "Is there a problem, sir?" Casey asked politely, her voice betraying nothing. "No problem if you cooperate. Keys and cash, and nobody gets hurt." Through her rearview mirror, Casey could see Tommy positioning himself behind the car. Vincent was approaching from the passenger side, nervous energy making him fidgety. Standard intimidation formation, designed to make the victim feel surrounded and helpless. Casey had been in actual surrounded situations. She'd been pinned down by enemy fire with no backup and no clear escape route. She'd fought her way out of Taliban strongholds with nothing but her sidearm and the Marines beside her. 3 amateur criminals in a nightclub parking lot weren't even a warm-up. "Of course," Casey said, reaching for her purse. "Let me just get my wallet." But instead of her wallet, Casey's hand found something else. Something she'd carried every night for 8 months, but never thought she'd need to use. Her service pistol. A Sig Sauer M17, the same model she'd carried through 2 combat deployments. Muscle memory guided her fingers to the grip as 8 years of military training compressed into a single moment of clarity. Jake Morrison had made 2 fatal errors. First, he'd assumed that a small woman driving for Uber was helpless. Second, he'd given her time to think. In combat, 5 seconds was an eternity. Casey had already calculated 17 different ways to neutralize all 3 attackers before Jake finished explaining what he wanted. Casey's transformation was instantaneous and complete. One moment, she was a struggling gig worker trying to make rent. The next, she was Staff Sergeant Morgan, Marine Force Recon, operating under combat conditions. "Step out now, or I'll—" Jake began. Casey exploded into motion. Her car door swung open with enough force to knock Jake backward, his gun hand flying wide. Before he could recover, Casey was out of the vehicle and moving with the fluid precision of someone who'd been trained to kill efficiently. Jake tried to bring his weapon to bear, but Casey was already inside his guard. Her left hand trapped his gun arm, while her right delivered an elbow strike to his solar plexus that dropped him to his knees, gasping for air. "Contact left!" Her mind automatically called out, though no Marines were there to hear it. Tommy, behind the car, was reaching for his own weapon, a cheap .38 revolver that he'd never fired in anger. Casey spun toward him, her own sidearm appearing in her hands with the smooth efficiency of countless hours of weapons training. "Drop it!" Casey's voice carried the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed in life-or-death situations. Tommy had never faced a trained professional before. His hands shook as he tried to aim, but Casey had already closed the distance between them. Her weapon was steady, her stance perfect, her finger indexed along the trigger guard with textbook precision. I said, "Drop it." The .38 clattered to the asphalt. Vincent, the smart one, was already running. Casey let him go. He wasn't a threat, and pursuit would expose her to unknown variables. Better to control the situation she had than chase one she couldn't predict. Jake was struggling to breathe. Both hands clutched to his chest where Casey's elbow had compressed his diaphragm. Tommy stood frozen, hands raised, staring at the woman he'd thought was an easy victim. "On your knees, hands behind your head," Casey ordered, her weapon trained on Tommy while keeping Jake in her peripheral vision. Both men complied immediately. The authority in her voice, the professional way she held her firearm, the calm precision of her movements. Everything screamed law enforcement or military training. "Lady, we're sorry," Tommy stammered. "We didn't know." "Quiet." Casey's mind was racing through post-contact procedures. Secure the scene. Account for all threats. Assess for injuries. Contact authorities. The same checklist she'd run through dozens of times in Iraq and Afghanistan now applied to a Phoenix parking lot. But there was a problem. Calling the police meant questions. Questions meant background checks. Background checks meant people would discover that Casey Morgan, Uber driver, was actually former Staff Sergeant Morgan, who'd left the Marines under circumstances that were classified above most people's clearance level. Some secrets were worth protecting. "Here's what's going to happen," Casey said, her weapon still trained on the two men kneeling in front of her Toyota Camry. "You're going to walk away from here, and you're never going to mention this to anyone. You're going to find new careers that don't involve threatening innocent people." Jake finally caught his breath enough to speak. You're just letting us go." Casey studied his face in the parking lot's fluorescent lighting. He was young, probably mid-20s, with the kind of desperation that came from limited options and poor choices. She'd seen that look before, on the faces of insurgents who'd been recruited more by circumstance than ideology. "I'm giving you a chance to make better decisions," she said. "Don't waste it." "Who are you?" Tommy whispered. Casey almost smiled. "Someone you really didn't want to mess with." She kept her weapon trained on them while they slowly stood up and backed away. Jake retrieved his pistol from where it had fallen, but made no move to raise it. The fight had gone out of both men completely. As they disappeared into the maze of parked cars, Casey felt the familiar post-combat combination of exhaustion and hypervigilance. Her hands were rock steady, her breathing controlled, but she knew the crash would come later. It always did. She holstered her weapon and leaned against her car, checking her watch. The entire confrontation had lasted exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds. Not quite 5 minutes, but close enough. Her phone buzzed. Another ride request. Casey looked at the notification and almost laughed. Normal life trying to reassert itself. The world moving on as if nothing had happened. Because for everyone except 4 people in a Phoenix parking lot, nothing had. She accepted the ride. The next passenger was a tired-looking nurse named Patricia, heading home after a 12-hour shift at Phoenix General. She climbed into Casey's back seat with the grateful exhaustion of someone who'd spent the day saving lives. "Long night?" Patricia asked, noticing Casey's slightly elevated breathing. "Just the usual Friday night chaos," Casey replied, pulling away from the hospital. Nothing I can't handle. In her rearview mirror, Casey could see Patricia settling in for the 20-minute ride to her apartment complex. Just another routine fare, unaware that her driver had just neutralized 3 armed attackers using skills learned in some of the most dangerous places on Earth. "I don't know how you do it," Patricia continued. "Driving strangers around all night. Doesn't it get scary sometimes?" Casey thought about Jake Morrison's gun pressed against her window, about the moment when civilian Casey had disappeared and Staff Sergeant Morgan had taken control. "You learn to handle whatever comes up," she said simply. "Well, I think you're brave. I could never do what you do." If only she knew, Casey thought. Patricia spent her days saving lives in sterile hospital rooms, surrounded by colleagues and security. Casey had spent years saving lives in environments where death could come from any direction at any moment. But that was the thing about secrets. The biggest ones were always hiding behind the most ordinary facades. As the sun rose over Phoenix, Casey sat in her apartment, cleaning her service weapon with the methodical precision she'd learned at Paris Island 15 years ago. The Sig Sauer M17 field stripped easily into its component parts, each piece familiar and comforting in her hands. She'd carried this weapon through 2 combat deployments, 3 major firefights, and dozens of patrol operations where every corner could hide an enemy. Tonight, it had protected her in a parking lot that smelled like spilled beer and cigarettes. Casey's phone showed the night's earnings, $247 in fares, plus tips. Not bad for 8 hours of work, especially considering she'd spent 5 minutes of it preventing her own murder. Her laptop was open to the Uber driver app, ready for her to log back on whenever she chose. The city never slept, and there was always someone who needed a ride. Always another opportunity to blend into the background, to be invisible, to be normal. But normal was a relative concept for someone who'd spent 8 years being the tip of America's spear in the war on terror. Casey's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Thank you for not calling the cops. You won't see us again. Jay." She deleted the message without responding. Jake Morrison and his crew would either learn from tonight's lesson or they wouldn't. Either way, it was no longer her problem. Casey reassembled her weapon, loaded a fresh magazine, and secured it in the lockbox she kept under her bed. Tomorrow night, she'd carry it again while driving strangers through the city, just another safety precaution for a woman working alone at night. Most of her passengers would never know they were being protected by someone who'd earned the right to wear the eagle, globe, and anchor. They'd see exactly what Casey wanted them to see: a polite, professional driver who got them safely from point A to point B. And that was fine with Casey. She'd had enough of being noticed, of standing out, of being the person everyone looked to when violence was the only solution. These days, she was content to be invisible. But if someone threatened her or her passengers, they'd quickly discover that invisible didn't mean helpless. Staff Sergeant Morgan was always there, just beneath the surface, ready to emerge when civilian solutions weren't enough. Because some skills, once learned, never really go away. They just wait quietly until they're needed again. And in a city like Phoenix, they're always needed again. This has been another Untold Legends story. Remember, the most dangerous people are often the ones who look the most harmless. That quiet person driving your Uber might just be hiding skills that could save your life, or end someone else's.